so much. There's so many questions coming in, so I'm going to go to these in a minute because I want to make sure this looks like there's some quite meaty questions in here. So I want to make sure we do them justice. One thing I just wanted to ask you to expand on a bit, Taylor, there is, and Lee, perhaps, do you feel like when they are going into individual projects or once they're signed up, that there's enough information to feel, okay, really confident about what they know for that individual piece of work that they're giving to? Is it quite transparent, quite clear for everybody to understand what they are committing to for each different piece of work that they might be involved in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Especially ones that I have seen if I'm eligible for, even just trying to see if you're eligible, you get all of the information. So it's not like you have to first indicate interest or eligibility and then see all the information. You get it just right up front. And that's what helps you make your decision, one, if you want to pursue that study. I think sometimes, I've noticed in research that consents and stuff can kind of be behind these firewalls almost, where you have to first get in touch with a researcher and learn in depth all about the research, and then you see what the consent is like. And I feel like it's weird as a patient because once you've gotten to that point, you may feel okay, well, maybe this can I've already gotten so far, I'll just sign the consent. Well, if you saw that information from the beginning, you had more time to think about it. So, and I think especially with online studies and virtual studies, that just being able to have as much information, relevant information as you can at the get-go is so important. Something else that I also noticed that I thought was good was that there also wasn't too much information, because I know that I've signed up for things before where I've just not read the fine print because it's way too long. And while I do understand that, there are rules and regulations on what needs to be said, it can also be daunting, going back to that word, when you see a 20-page thing that you have to read. So I think it's getting to the point at the very beginning. And then, if patients need these 20-page documents, then they need them. And some people might read all the fine print and some people might not. But at least presenting the information, the important and relevant information to the patients and caregivers up front is so important, because we've all talked about, we don't have a lot of time. So you're introducing another barrier to research if it's you need to sit down right here and read this 20-page consent before anything else.
And I guess there's generally two people there, isn't there? There's one that ticks the box because they're yeah, whatever, I don't want to read that. And there's the others that go, no, I don't want to participate because that's too much. So Pam, was that a really conscious decision on your part? I could see you were, really nodding when Taylor was talking there. Was that a really conscious thing to be really strategic about the way you remove that barrier so people really do see everything up front before they're committing a moment of time to that?
Yep, we want to make sure that it's easy. There's, for each thing that we offer, there's a time commitment. It could be 30 minutes to do a survey. It could be, 2 hours to do a focus group. And we want to put that up front, because if there's no reason to take someone through all the screening document if they're never going to commit to a 2-hour focus group. So we put that in there. We tell them what it's about. Is it about this condition? Is it about mobility issues or hearing loss or vision issues or whatever, whatever the particular topic is, and then what they would be doing. Are they doing a survey? Are they doing an online community for 2 weeks? All of those things are important for you to know, because if you're, an older person with a condition, you might not really even know what an online community is, and you're not doing it. But you're happy to do a phone interview. So, putting all of that in there is really important. And so we want to put that up front so people can kind of, they look at that email and it says all of that information and they can go, nope, or yeah, I'm going to click on this link, and they move forward. And then they go to all the questions, and kind of to what Taylor was saying, all of that other stuff happens later. If you choose to go forward with, here's what we're asking you to do. Are you interested? We have some things that are, that are online or events where they want to do video vignettes with patients. It's in the email, because some people are not doing a video vignette. And, why put them through all of that screening? It makes people really angry. And so we don't want to make any patients or caregivers angry, because, we do an awful lot to try to bring them on board, to protect their information and protect them from, random, any sorts of things that might be bothersome. We don't advertise, all of that stuff. And then, the last thing we want to do is irritate them and have them say, nope, not taking any more emails from you. So we really work very hard to try to make it, clean and simple and as easy as possible for them to participate.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear your experiences. I should just say that to everyone that's listening, that in the chat that Becky has shared the links for signing up. So please do have a look in there. Right, let's try and work through some questions because there are a lot here. So first one we've got from Nellie Moore. She said, not a question as such, but just wants to raise the importance of getting permission from the person before entering into study. She says, as a disabled person myself, it's vitally important that no decision is made without us in the process. As an autistic adult woman, late diagnosed at 53, asking the permission of the patient and their lived experience is really important. I guess that's quite an interesting thing. So in terms of maybe when you might be filling out on behalf of other people, how does the consenting look like for that? Lots of parents will be doing this on behalf of their children, or, adults maybe with some cognitive or other issues. How does that work from a consenting point of view?
So for the studies that we have, when people sign up, they sign up individually. So it's a person, so I'm a person with a condition and I sign up, or I could be the caregiver of a person with a particular condition. So the studies that come to me as a caregiver, I'm answering as a caregiver. I'm not answering as the patient. So we try to make that very clear.
Right.
We do have an awful lot of studies that would go to a parent like Lee talking about, their child's experience, even though, he's 17, if he could not answer the questions himself, we wouldn't send it to his son. We would send it to him to answer as a caregiver of a person with a particular condition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what researchers don't want is your assumptions about what someone else thinks or feels. They want to know what you feel or what you think as the patient or as the caregiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got someone here who's obviously already working with you that says very easy to sign up and work with Rare Patient Voice. That's great to hear. I've got one from somebody who says they represent an ultra rare condition, so a really small patient population. So they're saying if they were to participate, the sign up would likely be very small. So, they're struggling to see what the value might be for really small organizations. Are they missing something? So what would you say to someone who maybe has a really small incident rate, much like yourself, I guess, Lee? What would be the advice you'd give there in that situation?
Just sign up. As Pam said, you may not take part in that research, but down the road, you might take part. And, it all helps with what I've said about, taking part in research is only going to make things better.
Yeah.
It's only going to progress things. I know it can be very daunting. Even as a parent, it can be daunting, to put your child through research or something like that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it is worth it, and it's going to help change the world.
And also, I think because you mentioned about, some of these studies are not necessarily disease specific. So, there may still be wider opportunities to input into the wider sort of disability or rare disease landscape without it being necessarily specific to yours. Somebody's here has said, are there opportunities for non-patients such as parents and caregivers? So I think, and advocacy leaders. And I think, we've answered that. Yes, absolutely, there are. So again, if you're in that category, sign up and see where you can input. So someone, Tina's asking, do you need to be in the UK?
No, we are in the UK, the US, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Australia, and New Zealand right now. And eventually we'll probably expand to other countries. We do allow you to sign up from any country where you are, but we don't necessarily have studies for every country, if that makes sense. So clients will come to us and they'll say, okay, we're looking for these patients in Germany and, and the UK. And so those are the groups that we go to, but eventually we may have, have patients in every country. That's what I hope.
Yeah. Absolutely. Someone's asking how to get in touch with you, Pam, but I see that Wes has provided your contact details, and they'll also be in the chat. So and at the end of the presentation, any pointers to any good platform that promotes patient involvement opportunities? I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement there. Can anyone participate? I think we've answered that. Let me just read through this quickly. So I think this is probably a little bit of a repetition, but again, worth reinforcing. Says, as an ultra-rare patient, I never find any research into my condition. How do you think ultra-rare patients can find ways to be part of paid research, i.e. broad rare disease research? So I think we've kind of touched on that as well. And I think you possibly alluded to the fact that if you were to get a cohort of patients in a particular disease group, that you can also be looking outwardly for opportunities, I guess, to bring into your platform. Would I be right with that?
Right. Yep, we can certainly do that and look for, we do often have clients who are in, ultra rare or rare or ultra rare spaces who are, maybe they don't have something until, they're looking at their pipeline, and well, in 5 years we might have, a study, and they let us know, and we may start, building that community, because in 5 years there'll be a lot of research for that community. But even as, an ultra rare patient, there may be other things you can participate in that are not specific to your disease today, but it might be, a more general study about genetic conditions or, neurological conditions. There's some of them are much broader than disease specific. So I would encourage you to sign up if you're at all interested in being part of research.
And I think your story was quite impactful there, Taylor, because you said, 5 years ago, you would have never imagined that there would be so much research happening for carrier status and for, so that's changed considerably for you in that time, hasn't it? So I guess for all of us, we don't know what's around the corner, really, do we?
Yeah, obviously I'm not, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, but it does seem that with certain rare diseases, like things can something happens and the research landscape completely changes. In the case of ALD, it was just newborn screening. So ALD newborn screening is now in most states in the US, and just in the last few years, as more states have implemented newborn screening, that's why now that there's more patients being identified, a lot of more researchers are interested. But, it's not only newborn screening that something happens, like researchers might identify that a certain rare condition is a really good candidate for gene therapy. And then there becomes more research interest in that disease. Yeah. So while ALD isn't ultra rare, it definitely, was at the point previously where there was nothing that I as a carrier especially could be a part of. And now I'm in an observational study, like an in-person study, but I've also done a bunch of different surveys, interviews, and also just give feedback like whenever possible to try to improve studies. A funny example I had when Pam was talking about, giving how it's so important for us to give our feedback on like study design. So as I said, I'm in a study, it's in Baltimore, and I had to do like a cognitive assessment. And one of the things was looking at a clock and like a normal manual clock, I guess, and saying what the time was. But I'm in Generation Z and I'm just not looking at clocks. So I actually got the time wrong by 10 minutes. And I said to the researcher, like, I was the youngest one in the study, but I was like, you should consider, or, that this might not be a good fit for people.
Slightly warping the data a bit there.
Yeah. And like, he probably would have never considered that had I not said like, I'm not used to looking at a clock like this. I know that might sound silly, probably to most people listening, but like, I thought that was just an example of like, that something like that's important, because they need to consider all of those things if they want to capture the most accurate data. So I think just, seeking out opportunities to share information when you can, to just try to shape the research to be better.
And that's a really simple insight that actually is really important. I mean, it's like in the UK, a very standard cognitive test would be to ask who the Prime Minister is, but nobody knows who the Prime Minister is at the moment because it's changing so much.
Yeah, that's so true.
That doesn't work anymore. It's knowing these nuances, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we've got another question here from Louise in Wales. It's quite an interesting one, actually. So she's talked about she's taken part in research before and had honorariums, and had to, which is really valued. She had to take some unpaid leave for some of them, so it was really helpful. But it has become complicated. And she had to spend over an hour on the phone to HMRC, who are our tax body, in terms of declaring the money and looking at how the tax situation might be. I don't know if this is something you can answer, Pam, whether it's specific to the UK or whether you see this in the States, but if families are, in, for example, in receipt of benefits, or are there issues around receiving monetary, and how would that be dealt with from a tax purpose?
So I can only really speak to the US on this, but we have, if you make over something like $600, you have to receive a specific form to declare that on your taxes. And we do get people questioning, if it's going to impact their benefits. I don't know that it does or doesn't impact if they are on social security benefits. And I think that's kind of parallel to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It would, it's really something that you have to individually talk to either your tax advisor or, to your own, within your own country, somebody who can help you understand the tax laws, because, there are some nuances and, you have to follow the law. So if you're supposed to declare a certain amount of money, certainly you should do that. But for our purposes, most people who participate in the course of a year probably don't make over $600.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily have to declare that. But if there's something big going on in your disease area, and maybe there are a lot of studies, and that might be the case. So I would just suggest that you talk to your your either tax attorney or some government agency to figure out if there's an impact to your disability benefits.
Okay, thank you so much. Last question I think we can get to here. So Cheryl has said, if you see a need for a product or better adaptation, is there a best practice way to reach out to a company to help make them aware of the need? I'm wondering if there's anything better typically to reach out rather than just sending a message to a generic company or email form. Interesting. So if you see something out there, you think, I know how they can make that better. What's the best way to try and influence that?
I don't know. I have a good answer for that. Because, if you think about a pharmaceutical company or, a device manufacturer, often they're huge and they have big, they have a lot of arms that, they deal with different things. So there may be a way, I don't know if anyone else on the call knows, if there's a way to, provide new product ideas to, a particular pharma company or a company in general who is creating things, medical wearables or something like that. It's a great question. Yeah. I wish I had a great answer.
Maybe they should come to you, and that's a sales pitch to you.
And I'll try to figure out how to
pick. Know someone who thinks they can improve your product.
Sounds good to me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm mindful of the time, so I think we're going to have to end it there with the questions, but we will go through any that we haven't got to make sure that we do reflect on those fully. It's been really interesting talking to all of you. I think it's really great to get a feel for, how it works, how we can remove some of the barriers to people accessing research, demystify it to make us all realize that actually you don't need to be in academia to get involved in research. It really is for everybody. And it's a really good platform to kind of get involved, like you said, Lee, really drive things that are happening and change, but actually also to have that opportunity to drive some passive income as well, which I think, in the current climate is really powerful for everyone. So I'd just like to close by saying a huge thank you, Pam, Lee and Taylor, for talking to us today, and of course to Rare Patient Voice for partnering with us to bring this really important discussion today. Thank you to everyone for listening and bringing all your really insightful questions. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. The hour has absolutely flown by. Please do feel free to reach out to us via the contacts on screen shortly. And as I say, Becky has put the sign up details and links there. So please do check it out and follow those links, and have a great rest of the day. So thank you, everyone, and take care.